Well, good evening. I'm Alan Jackson, and welcome back to Nashville. I get a lot of emails about making this show 1 hour long, and I thank you for that, but I'm not sure that even 60 minutes would be enough to discuss all the change that's happening now. Donald Trump certainly ran on Make America Great Again, but I don't remember him saying anything about doing it all in the first month. Well, a lot of what I hear in the traditional, more predictable media sounds a lot like a loud anti-Trump echo chamber. So what we're trying to provide here is information and analysis that you haven't heard before, presented from a biblical worldview. It's news, as in something N-E-W, not pushed in one direction or the other, and truthful to the core. In fact, this show taps into an action plan that I call Watch, Listen, Think, and Act. It's about watching and listening to what's going on around us and what's being reported, and then thinking, considering how what we see and hear measures up against what we're actually experiencing. And then acting, finding practical ways we can bring truth into the communities where each of us live. Well, if you've watched this show before, you've likely seen the editor-in-chief of Breitbart News. He's the author of some best-selling books, and he has a podcast too, which is conveniently branded with his name, the Alex Marlow Podcast. Welcome back, Alex.
Pastor, it's always nice to see you. Thank you for having me again.
Well, so much has happened since we last met. I want to jump right in and hear your thoughts. Amid all the stories of migrants being rounded up and deported quite effectively, came this surprising headline. New York court considers law that would allow 800,000 non-citizens to vote. So even as Tom Homan, Kristi Noem, and Pete Hegseth were doing their work, a lot of it in person, a judge is trying to determine if the law can be changed to allow 800,000 non-citizens to vote. I'd say it was hard to believe, but I'm prepared for nearly anything these days. What are your thoughts on what seems to be absurd to me?
Yeah, so what we've watched over the last, several decades in this country is a war on the concept of citizenship. They on the left, would like to blur the distinction, if not erase the distinction, between what it means to be a citizen of this country and a mere resident. They don't want there to be any distinction whatsoever, because once that happens, then they can just import a permanent voter base that will allow for them to bridge the gap and perhaps even create a permanent majority. So they need to try this first at a local level, because if you see the way the Democrats are operating these days, they're sort of a regional metropolitan party. That's really where they're at. They don't really have a lot of sway outside of that, a little with some demographics in the suburbs, but not by much. But most of suburban and rural America is firmly Republican at this point. So their best bet is for these cities to try to be incubators for leftist thought and energy. Energy is really important. If you notice, their national leadership is pretty much directionless, rudderless right now. They don't know what to say. They can't tell if they're impressed by what Trump has been doing or if it's illegal. Should they impeach Elon Musk for his Doge initiatives? But that implies that he's legitimate. Maybe he wasn't legitimate to begin with. They don't really know what to do. They don't know which end is up. So what they end up doing is, when they have strongholds like they do in these major cities, they try some revolutionary policy, see if it holds, see if it can pass legal muster. This should offend all Americans. These people are not citizens. Citizens should not vote in the United States, period, paragraph. The fact that we have to have this discussion is simply in order to distract from all the positive stuff that we're doing. We have to have it. We have to stop it. But it just shows you that wherever there's a major city in this country, the left still poses a big threat in their efforts to try to fundamentally transform this country.
Well, this next one I find encouraging. The Homeland Security Secretary, Kristi Noem, is looking into using IRS agents to track down people who are here illegally, especially those who are involved in human trafficking networks. The IRS has more than 80,000 employees, so instead of chasing down church groups and conservatives, the agents could track down drug and child trafficking payments and have those people arrested. Listen to how the president put it.
You said that you envision sending the 80-something thousand IRS agents hired under Biden to the border. What role do you see them playing?
Well, we'll see. I mean, I may do that, or I may use different people, but we're going to send more. We're going to give the Border Patrol some help.
Well, remember, Biden wanted to hire 20,000 more IRS agents to chase down the American public. He had no interest in tracking drug dealers or the criminals who run the underground sex trafficking. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, and I think that number might have even been closer to 80,000. It was a lot of people and a huge budget. They really wanted to expand this to try to target Americans who are already broke. Most Americans, we're not poor in this country, but there's a lot of people who are broke. They're paying their minimum on their credit cards. They're very nervous about the future of the country. They don't think we're heading in the right direction. And we've got this government with all this levels of fraud and abuse that's been uncovered over the last few weeks. And then you find stuff like you've got FEMA payments going to migrant hotels in New York City. You find that a relief that's designed for some of the families that lost their homes in Los Angeles going to the homeless people. We're just allocating funds at a level that is entirely inappropriate, ought to be illegal. But with regards to these deportations, I'm an all the above type guy. Use the IRS, use the FBI, use the Department of Education, even though there shouldn't be one. Use the Bureau of Land Management. I don't care. I use a bunch of celebrities. Go out there and send a message that America's closed. We're no longer going to be hospitable towards illegal aliens. And all of a sudden, a lot of the country's problems, we're talking gangs, we're talking fentanyl, we're talking wages getting undercut. All of this is going to start going away. So whatever approach they want to take, I'm all for it. This is the #1 problem that's facing us.
We've heard so many discouraging stories about where USAID was spending our hard-earned income. This one is one of the most outrageous. $10 million for meals that went to Al-Qaeda-funded terrorist groups, and $75 million for DEI programs in foreign countries. Elon Musk says he's found very little at USAID that he believes Americans will support. Stunning revelations, aren't they?
Yeah, they're unbelievable. Actually, on my podcast today, that I had Senator Joni Ernst, who heads up the Doge caucus in the Senate. And if you want to know why they're moving so fast, she's been tracking these waste and abuse on a monthly basis forever. She's got a squeal report that she puts out. We publish it at Breitbart, but we haven't had the motivation from the executive branch or from others in the legislature to actually deal with it. Finally, we do. But that's why they know where all the waste is. They've been tracking it. Rand Paul does a good job as well. But Senator Ernst better than anyone else. And so they know where everything is. They just got to pinpoint it. And once you start sharing with people that $20 million of our taxpayer money is going to a Sesame Street program in Iraq, where we sent Ukrainians to Paris Fashion Week. We spent $15 million on contraceptives and condoms in Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. Once the people realize that that's where some of our money's going, they start wondering the obvious question, where's the rest of it going? Because it's hard to see the evidence it's going anywhere good.
Well, here's a surprise. CBS News did a poll on the president, and they found that 70% of the country say that President Trump is keeping his campaign promises. That's the same CBS News that Trump recently sued for reconstructing the Kamala Harris 60 Minutes interview when she was running against him. Do you think the CBS brass considered not releasing the positive poll?
Probably not, because it feels like that there's so much scrutiny now. The establishment media has to rebrand to some degree. Mm-hmm. The good thing is, I don't know if the public really wants it to, because a lot of people just moved on. They're getting their news from places like TBN, like Breitbart, like these podcasts that are so popular now on online platforms like X. They're not waiting for CBS News to tell them what the news is. But if CBS News wants to survive without becoming a huge loss leader for whichever conglomerate owns it, then they're going to have to try to balance out some of their fake news with some real news. So this is a modest effort to do that. I'm glad they put it out. And it really should surprise no one. Trump is doing exactly what he said, and people like that in this country.
Well, let's take a short break. And let me suggest you jump in and write us an email. As you know, we read them all and respond to many. The address is comments at allenjacksonnow.com. I'll be right back. We're back now with the editor-in-chief of Breitbart News, Allen Marlow. There was big news from the larger media world this week when both PBS and Disney dropped their DEI programs. PBS had to do it due to the president's executive order, but Disney did so because of some investor pushback. Remember that Disney owns ABC News and ESPN, both of which have been at odds with conservatives for many years. In the campaign, Trump made it clear he was going to use some common sense if and when he got elected. Do you remember this?
I will also end the government policy of trying to socially engineer race and gender into every aspect of public and private life. We will forge a society that is colorblind and merit-based.
Alex, do you yet know if Disney actually shut their DEI efforts down or just hid them deep inside the big company?
Yeah, that's one thing that is a big risk here is that you just change people's titles and all of a sudden their head DEI officer is just the vice president of communications now or something. And they're still there with the same bad ideas that are offensive to all of us. But this is still a win. And I don't want to be too cruel and critical of people who are doing the right thing. And Disney is a real leftist company. Bob Iger, who runs Disney, is a committed leftist. He's not like a lot of these CEOs we see who are pure capitalists and are just trying to make money for their corporations. And in recent years, going woke has actually made you money in America, which is sad to say, but it is true. Going woke was not making you broke, it was making you very rich. Well, that's changed now. Now it appears that going woke will make you go broke. And this is a huge admission that Disney is acknowledging this fact and that they're going to start reining it back because a lot of their consumers are actually conservatives. The people, the families, you have to have children, you have to have families if you're going to consume Disney products for the most part. I guess there are those weird Disney adults out there, some places, but most of them are families. And so it makes sense for them as a company to start reining some of this stuff in. I could go through a laundry list of some of their absurd woke things they've done in recent years. It makes sense for them to stop. I'm very pleased about it. We're going to have to be vigilant to make sure they follow through, but this is very welcome, especially for people like me who have a lot of young kids. And with regards to PBS and NPR as well, we've been talking as a conservative movement about defunding these publications or these outlets for years. Donald Trump's finally doing something about it. It is so welcome and so overdue.
Most of the media that was bending the truth for Kamala Harris and Joe Biden is still doing much the same thing. They're publishing outright lies and disinformation, including partial truths, rather than the real truth about the world they're supposed to be reporting on. My question is it the only instinct they have to operate on, bashing Trump, or do they actually believe what they're saying? Because on some level, they have to know it's not the full truth.
Yeah, Pastor, you know I'm a student of these things, so I try to keep an eye, read between the lines of some of these newsrooms and read whatever reporting is available on these newsrooms. And you learn things like the New York Times basically structured their entire newsroom around the Russian collusion hoax. That was the basis of their editorial day to day, and they won Pulitzers for it. They sold a lot of subscriptions, and it turned out that all of it was fake. But they didn't care that it was fake. It was good business for them, and they're a publicly traded company. They've got a board that has a representation from CEOs and CFOs and founders of some of the biggest companies in the world. And that's what was guiding those decisions. And then when the Russian collusion hoax fizzled, they moved to race because there were all those race riots that were going on in 2020. And it was the coronavirus was not good for business because you couldn't put advertising on it, so you couldn't use that. So they fabricated all these race hoaxes because it was good for business. These are businesses, and they thought bashing Trump was good for business. Will it continue to be good for business? I hope not, but just know that that's where they're coming from. They're willing to lie, cheat, and steal so long as it makes them money, and lying about Trump has been their best business for the last 8 or 10 years.
Well, before we go, I want to run an idea by you. What do you think of having reporters from all the biggest liberal outlets, the New York Times, the Washington Post, MSNBC, and CNN, all stationed in the heartland of America for a year at a time? Not at the fancy hotels, but in homes and apartments, commingled with the rest of America, and near the most popular diner in town so they can actually listen to what people think and believe about their country. What do you think?
So I would never impose all of these elite journalists on the heartland of America. I love the heartland too much. I would never tell you guys to absorb all those horrible left-wing journalists. So I can't go along with this plan. But if I was a journalist, I would voluntarily go and spend more time in the middle of America, talk to people in the middle of America. They're so consistently surprised at what is normative viewpoints in this country, like simple stuff, like we don't want men beating up on women in sports. It's so obvious that we feel that way, that we think a border is a good thing, that we think taxes are too high. These are not radical opinions, these are normal opinions. And you could learn that if you spend some time with any of the people who you're trying to sell your newspapers to, but they won't do that. And the only people who benefit from that, though, are the people in the heartland who don't have to deal with the insufferable journalists.
Well, Alex Marlow, thank you for your time again today. Stay in touch, and we'll see you again soon.
You got it, Pastor. Thank you.
When we come back, some thoughts of my own on where to find hope within this noise. Well, a lot of change is happening. There's a lot of competing voices, and some of them are very loud and influential. It seems the most predictable constant is that those who oppose President Trump will be loud and unrelenting in their opposition. Recent headlines have portrayed Trump as a threat to democracy, that he's putting the U.S. on the brink of a dictatorship, and that democracy has died. Well, the persistence, the volume, and the broad cooperation of legacy media, they make it difficult to interpret what is truly happening. These loud voices have proven a willingness to tell any lie, to fabricate the most remarkable accusations, and then brazenly repeat what they know to be totally false. It's a confusing time. It's often uncomfortable. It can be disorienting. You're trying to sort out what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. Should I believe this? What's the right action to take? Well, when Jesus was on the earth, the circumstances had some similarities. There were loud, competing voices in his time as well. Listen to what Jesus said to the religious leaders in Jerusalem. It's in Luke chapter 12. He said, "You know how to interpret the appearance of the earth and the sky. How is it that you don't know how to interpret or analyze the present time?" He was saying to them that you know how to anticipate weather patterns, but you don't know how to understand or analyze the times in which you live. Now, Jesus performed many miracles. He fulfilled many biblical prophecies that religious leaders had spent their entire lives studying. Yet they couldn't recognize that the Messiah was in the midst of them doing mighty things. It's clear that Jesus' expectation is that his audience would not just be biblically literate, but that they would understand the world in which they lived in the light of the teaching of Scripture. Now, I'm not suggesting that our president is a Messiah by any stretch of the means. That office has already been filled. But I do believe that Jesus expects that we would look at our times and understand them in light of what God is doing in the earth. We can't just hide inside our churches and have Bible studies. It's vital in this season of change where there's competing voices that we as Christ followers watch, listen, think, and act. God's moving in the earth. Let's engage and be a part of it. If we'll do that, there's more reasons for hope than despair, I promise. When I come back, we'll read some of your emails. Thank you for taking the time to send us your emails. We always look forward to reading them. Christopher Scribani, he emailed, "I'm hearing in the news of how many billions of our tax dollars are funding foolish causes in addition to terrorist countries. The implications point to the likelihood that members of Congress are getting kickbacks on that money. If this is true, would this kind of practice be classified as quid pro quo, and could it be considered grounds for a congressional hearing?" Well, I'm not sure on the details of that. I think it could be classified as stealing, an irresponsibility, and a betrayal of the American people and your trust as an elected official. Congressional hearings, I'm a little bit weary with them. They seem to be focused on sound bites for whoever their select audience are and not much meaningful change. I think elections are our best opportunity to change the behaviors of those in Washington. If we'll change our hearts in Middle America, we'll have a different class of leaders in Washington, D.C. Joe Hay commented on YouTube. He said, "China is definitely bluffing about their AI ability. Have you ever tried to assemble a product from China using the instructions they provide?" I have, Joe, and I have some leftover parts. I'll be happy to contribute them to your project if you would like. Just send an address. Joe B. emailed, "Pastor, I love your truthful, God-filled show. I find it ironic that we have a constitutional crisis that Musk and Trump are saving taxpayers' money. The biggest complainers are the worst offenders. However, it was not a constitutional crisis when the prior administration defied the Supreme Court and paid tuition loans, used lawfare, and closed the nation due to illegal gain-of-function research, spied on U.S. citizens, housed illegals, and preemptive pardons. The list can go on and on. God bless you." The list could go on and on, but we'll run out of time. It's beyond absurd, and it's time for those of us that live in this nation to wake up and pay attention and use the privilege of voting to make a difference. Don't spend your time being angry at the politicians in Washington. Let's spend our time and energy cooperating with God in our lives, saying yes to Him, helping our families do that. That'll make our homes better, our cities and communities better, and ultimately, I believe it'll even change Washington, D.C. If you missed the live broadcast, you can always go to YouTube. They're posted every evening. The address is on the screen. Make sure you send your emails to comments@allenjacksonnow.com. From all of us here in Nashville, thank you for joining us tonight, and hope you have a wonderful weekend.